Ti-boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom. Ti-boom, boom, boom. We will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will get there.
Good morning, good evening, good night. Welcome. Let's pray. Deus de todos os povos e nações, inspire toda a humanidade a agir em conjunto por um mundo mais justo, uma comunidade de paz e harmonia. God of all peoples and nations, inspire all humanity to act together for a more just world, a community of peace and harmony. Amen.
It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to this day during the Africa and African Diaspora Virtual Conference. This conference, started on Saturday. And on Saturday, we started with telling her stories, exploring women's engagement before and at the Manchester, Tanzania, and beyond. And then on Sunday, we had the opening service. And here, the opening ceremony, we had wonderful speakers. We heard, from the presidency office in South Africa. And then we were also addressed by the former president of the Republic of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki. Monday, we had another wonderful session under the theme, Understanding the Intersection between Decolonizing Knowledge and Black Lives Matter. On Tuesday, we had another wonderful time, and this time we concentrated on our Tuesdays today, and the theme is a shared journey with critical multilateral international organizations. So I feel honored, that I've been asked to moderate the first session. My name is Isabel Apao Piri. I'm Deputy General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, responsible for public witness and diaconia. In today's program, we have 3 speakers, to start with in plenary, and we'll hear from Mr. Ade Olaira, and then from Miss Angela Na Afole Odai, and we'll also hear from Dr. Dinabantu Mashala. And we'll have about an hour, allowing you to ask questions and answers. And I would encourage you to write the questions in the questions and answer section and not in the chat, because that will make it easier for us, to respond, to the questions. And during this time, we will also encourage our panelists, to speak to each other. When they are presenting their papers, they will be listening to what each one of them is saying, and then they will also be able to ask the other person some questions. When we finish the panel, then we'll go into parallel sessions. There will be 2 parallel sessions. One section will be with Dr. Fulata Moyo, and this one will be for the critical assessment of multilateral international organizations and equitable international governance. And the second one will be led by Professor Robert Van Niekerk, and that one will be on building bridges between Africa and its diaspora and consideration of the establishment of a Pan-African network or organization. And after the parallel sessions, we'll come back to the plenary, and there we'll listen to reports, and we'll have a conversation on the reports. And this will be led by Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith. And then we have time to receive the concluding remarks and announcements, again from the Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith. So for now, it is a pleasure for me to introduce to you our first speaker, who is Dr. Ade Olaia. And Dr. Ade Olaia is an expert moderator for the UNESCO Inclusive Policy Labs People of African Descent and the SDGs E-Team. The discussions and the documents archived there include narratives from collaborative postgraduate research, which he participated in as a member of the European Network Against Racism and of the International Coalition for People of African Descent between 2017 and 2021. In addition, he is a member of the newly established working group aiming to launch the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent in 2022. His other interests include membership of the Africa Oxford Initiative, Harvard Law School, Justice Initiative, and the United Kingdom's Academy for Social Justice and Society for Research in Higher Education. Recent professional experience at the local level includes assessment of the funding applications from third sector service providers, and he is a board member of non-governmental organizations working towards racial equity for people of African descent. Over to you, Mr. Alaia.
Sorry, are you seeing the document?
Yes, we can see the document.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't realize I was on mute as well. One quick correction though, I am not Dr. I am MA. I'm Master of Arts in Human Rights.
Okay.
So thanks for the promotion, but not at the moment. So, Excellencies, fellow panelists, and conference participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to address you all today on invitation of my fellow member of the recently formed working group of the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent, and that's Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith. In the short while that we've met, the working group has hit the ground running following the long-awaited adoption of the resolution, which established it as a human rights mechanism in August. It was set up, it was established at the General Assembly on the 2nd of August, 2021. And we are generally concerned about historical and contemporary manifestations of Afrophobia, depending on how you prefer it to be called. And I personally think there's no difference whether you want to call it Afrophobia or anti-Black racism, whatever. We're talking about, for the purposes of my discussion, what the Mangamizi, encompassing the genocide, systemic racism and discrimination that we as people of African descent, Afrodescendientes or Africans experience in our daily lives globally. And the empirical evidence is there that we do. So that's it. My participation in the celebration of the anniversary of the 1945 Pan-African Congress, says Manchester meeting, would not be true to my character without reference to our forebears in the struggle for human rights, equality, and justice. I just thought about my parents, who are from both sides of the pond. My late mother was West Indian, my father was Nigerian, but more so in terms of, you know, the Congress, the Haitian philosopher and anthropologist Antonio Firmin, little known man, but he tremendous spirit, tremendous fortitude in the face of adversity. Back in the 19th century, he was championing our cause in Paris. And at the very high level, he was one of only 2 Black men in one of those esteemed academic circles who were championing that, you know, we are equal, not only in physical, but in moral and mental capacity, when that was being disputed in the Society of Anthropology in France, which was the most renowned body of its kind in at that time. Certainly, I'm sure most people here will know about the Right Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, W. Du Bois, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm Omwale Malik Al-Shabazz, Madiba, Nkrumah, and so many others who have also contributed to the struggle. I'm starting there because recognition is one of the thematic objectives of the International Decade. We can recognize the negative, but we must also recognize the foresight, resilience, and integrity of those who have championed our freedom from oppression of historical white supremacist and imperialist hegemony. So I cut it down to around 3 or 4 of the conference themes, what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to start with Pan-Africanism and spirituality. That ties in very much with the prayer and also what I've just said about the ancestors, by stating I personally don't believe that spirituality and religious beliefs are an individual choice. Well, they are an individual choice, but it's not for, I believe they are an individual choice, which are not determined by being, or solely determined by being African or Pan-Africanist. For example, an interview I attended on Sunday between Professor Toyin Falola and Kabiesi Lamidi Adeyemi, who is the Alaafin of Oyo. The Alaafin alluded to the diversity of religious beliefs within the Yoruba nation, empire, depending on how you want to look at it, and diaspora, declaring that he himself, which was I found very interesting, embraced not only Muslim, but Christian and or traditional religious beliefs. And from what he was saying, I could hear very much, he does. I believe that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, asserts the right to freedom of religion, which state parties should adhere to without discrimination. So I don't believe in people being criminalized or discriminated against in any state, global north or global south, on the basis of their religion. I encourage all conference participants to partner with the working group for the launch of the UN Permanent Forum, as the previous speaker alluded to, in 2022. And I believe this can facilitate multilateral, multi-stakeholder Pan-Africanism with all for all, which is the second of your thematic objectives I'm going to speak about. And that includes the aspirations of Africa's sixth region, which is the remit that I'm going to be primarily looking at. This is a challenge before us as we move forward a century after Garvey's historic speech in Harlem, and 20 years after the Durban Declaration, Plan of Action, which recognized the failure of neoliberal Western economies to recognize our humanity, and this is Africans everywhere, and equality in rights and justice. I advocate state parties and other stakeholders ensure achievement of Agenda 2063. I've been doing that since 2017, or I did in 2017 when we were in Geneva. For example, Aspiration 1 is towards a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Aspiration 2, an integrated continent politically united based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africa's Renaissance. Now, I know 2016, 2017, and 2021 are different years altogether. The global protests for justice in 2020, for example, which is another thematic objective after recognition of IDPAD, highlights the importance of the conference theme, decolonizing knowledge. All Pan-African forebears knew this and contributed a body of scholarship often referred to as Black Atlantic ideology. I prefer to call it African Atlantic ideology because when we were transported from Africa around the globe, we were called Africans. They weren't called African Americans. They weren't even called, I think, well, Negro is just called about the color of your skin. They were called, they were Africans until I think it was just after, probably Lincoln or something that they started to change that. But they were just Africans. So I prefer to use the term African Atlantic ideology. It is for this reason that the United Negro Improvement Association had chapters in Europe and North America, where Garvey resided, but also there was knowledge exchange, and there were also chapters in Africa and Latin America because of our common oppression by white supremacist colonialism, hegemony. In that regard, in 2016, Professor Horn in the Kumba report states 21st century Pan-Africanism can and will only be achieved by a balanced combination of governmental action, consistent, even relentless community-based organizing, mass political mobilization, etc., etc. You have it before you so you can read it. That bottoms up multilateral stakeholders. Well, he didn't necessarily refer to it as being bottoms up, but that is what the UN has been that's what has been advocated by the 2030 agenda. Participatory, the development participatory policy interventions, where you get people who are on the margins, especially being included in decision-making processes that are going to affect them. So SDG 16, there's a specific target, but I'm going to encourage you to look at it, to look at the 2030 agenda. SDG 16 on the 2030 agenda advocates inclusive, democratic community participation of marginalized communities, including racialized African diaspora communities and African subcultural minorities. I've done that deliberately because there is, unfortunately, a certain amount of discriminatory practice, even in the continent, which I think if state parties want to be true to achieving the sustainable development, they need to revisit that and implement the targets for peace, justice, and good governance for all, inclusive for all, not particular groups of particular religions, ideologies, etc., but for all. I would say there has been some improved relations between the AU and the African diaspora. For example, the African Union was applauded and lauded for the pivotal role it recently played in the adoption of the General Assembly's resolution establishing the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. Without doubt, without the role played by the African group, I don't think the resolution would have been passed. So I join my voice to others who applaud the African group for ensuring that that key resolution, very important resolution, has been passed. And it wasn't passed in August. If it hadn't been passed, I wouldn't be here talking to you. Angelique wouldn't be here wouldn't be in the capacity as a member of the working group for people of African descent, for the personal permanent forum for people of African descent. It is although adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and economic implications resulting around the globe, it is therefore imperative that opportunities for aspiration 5 be met. You have that in front of you. And I think that is key. It is key that greater digital access is granted. It's very interesting how when states want to clamp down these days, they shut down the internet. They shut down Twitter. In Sudan, they shut down the internet. And from South Africa, the special rapporteur on racism, Tendai, referred to not only happening in the global South, but there is, we need to be careful as well in the global North about what goes on digitally. But certainly, it is a way forward in terms of knowledge exchange and progress. Yes, international law is not the right and preservative of states alone. It is also about the victims of human rights abuse in the African diaspora, in Africa. So, for example, NSARS is not only spoken about in Nigeria, spoken about in the US, spoken about, championed by organizations in the US and in Europe, and vice versa. We champion, or when George Floyd was murdered, African civil society was there. So in that respect, in the International Network of Scholars and Activists is one organization I'll mention. They are, they have been lobbying and championing reparatory justice, because it's not only about recognizing what has happened to us, but about now, even the UN is saying it's about reparatory justice. And so recent progress has been made, including the HR 14 USA. And this week, there's going to be the official launch of a parliamentary group in the UK Parliament looking at reparations. And of course, there's a CARICOM 10-point plan. So lastly, I hope I'm not going over my time. I'm going to look at Black Lives Matter, following on from what I said about the global protests. And this, so they are in response to police violence. A lot of it was in response to police violence, but then it gathered momentum and took on new face, attacking colonialism, because at the end of the day, a lot of the legislation and stuff is an offshoot, is perpetuating that imperialist white supremacist hegemony. In that regard, my discussion acknowledges contribution in Agenda 2063, which have been made by the Assembly of the African Union, and I've stated which I am alluding to, made by this African Union. For example, people-centered development, youth empowerment, and yet even here in the Global West, our youth suffer so much. I was at one conference where the youth actually stood up and said, listen, we want to be working, we want to work, but we don't want to be working for free. We want to be paid, and we want to pay decent wages. This is just kids just out of high school. That was just pre-COVID. Sadly, I feel so. Every time I think about what COVID is doing, I feel so sorry for those kids, because a lot of them now, they're going to have to work for peanuts. As a matter of fact, I know from some of the discussions I've been in that on the negative side, there's been an increase in child labor and, other of those negative in both Africa and I would say to a certain extent in the diaspora as well. So therefore we must we must advocate development, the third thematic objective of IDPAD, through social, economic, and environmental development of African diaspora communities as imperative for successful achievement of the 2030 agenda. The empirical evidence highlights we endure disproportionate inequalities in access to health, education, employment, as well as other social, economic, and cultural rights, and if I may say so, beyond that, into political and civil rights. Environmental racism, for example, contributes to environmental degradation and pollution, not only in Africa, for example, in the Delta region of Nigeria, where my father hails from, but also in the USA. I was astounded to find a South African company operating in USA, polluting Black diaspora, African diaspora community to the extent that so many of them died. I refer you to Mossville, the film. It's called Mossville. So many of them died. Some of them got all kind of high mortality and morbidity rates. Furthermore, gentrification of our neighborhoods for capitalistic overexploitation contributes to homelessness and economic disempowerment of our communities. Thank you very much. So we got a long way to go still. We're trying. I think the permanent forum is gonna reflect some of these concerns, and we would hope that they will be working with the UN to continue to address them in a more thorough way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ade Olaiya. We appreciate your presentation. You have raised, a lot of important points. I'll just pick one, which is central to everything that you have said. You have said that you are encouraging the conference participants to participate with the working group for the launch of the UN Permanent for All People of African Descent. To
Absolutely.
Stakeholder, I appreciate that very much. And I'm hoping that, this will be included in our final resolution. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you very much. Yeah.
Right. So we
absolutely
move on to Ms. Angela Na Afole Odai. Ms. Angela Odai is the acting head of Diaspora Division at the Directorate of Citizens and Diaspora Organizations, CIDO, of the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa. Having enjoyed almost a decade of professional experience as a development expert with experience in diaspora engagement, migration, and development at both national and continental level, she is currently manning the continental portfolio by mobilizing, engaging, and streamlining the activities of the global African diaspora into the policies and plans of the African Union. Over to you, Ms. Odai.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. I would start my video in a bit. Can I be heard, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished Reverend Ministers, people of the various faiths, ladies and gentlemen gathered here. Thank you so much for the opportunity granted to the Directorate of Citizens and Diaspora Organizations Directorate of the African Union Commission for us to actually address you on issues of the Sith region, which we are mandated actually to work on. So in view of this, I would like to say a big thank you on behalf of the Commission for this wonderful privilege given to us. It's always a pleasure having to speak about a significant people or group of persons based on various historical antecedents who actually matter to us. In view of that, this is what I'm discussing. I mean the diaspora, because I know of only Africa, which has the most diverse and unique diaspora. Diasporas way during the Ottoman Empire, diasporas which cut across the transatlantic issues of transatlantic history, diasporas who are more recent, which are post-colonial diasporas as well. And all these make Africa rich and makes Africa unique in its own right, so far as issues of diasporas are concerned. Because only in the Americas, we know of well over 200 million diasporas. We know of 19 million according to the International Organization for Migration report of 2020, who are living outside of the continent, who by our definition are willing actually to engage with the African Union and then with the African continent as a whole. So as not to delve into so much history, I would wish to actually make mention of the fact that diasporas are there so far as the AU is concerned, and their issues reflect actually in the Constitutive Act of the African Union, which is actually our guide, which talks about the invitation to African diaspora to contribute willingly towards the social and economic development of the continent. In view of this, CIDO has been mandated actually to work on these. Based on this particular mandate, in addition to that, we can all attest to the Global African Diaspora Summit in Sandton, South Africa in 2012, which saw to it that heads of state and government approved or commended that certain things needed to be done in order to ensure that we are able to actually foster, strengthen, and then, should I say better, for a better word, enhance closer relations with our African diaspora. In view of that, CEDAW was mandated as well to work on 5 major legacy projects we call diaspora legacy projects, which is the Africa Institute for Remittances. That's the only one which has been established till date. We have the African Diaspora Investment Fund, which is on its way towards validation. We currently just finished a specialized technical committee, experts committee on it, and it will be getting ready to go to the summit for validation. We have the African Diaspora Volunteer Corps. We have the African Diaspora Global Marketplace, which we are currently working on as well. We're currently doing a feasibility on it to see how best there could be hand-holding sessions between diasporas and then those on the continent, so far as entrepreneurship is concerned, so far as innovations are concerned, so that there'll be these groupings, and then we'll be able to actually forge ahead into something more big or something more continental. As I speak with you, we are having the Diaspora Innovation Days going on in Abuja, Nigeria, with well over 200 diaspora, especially diaspora youth, which constitute most of the time the second and third generations or multi-generational diasporas, bringing together most of their ideas, most of their initiatives to ensure that those on the continent are able to impact knowledge on those on the continent, and those on the continent are as well having the opportunity to impact their knowledge of being on the ground and doing business in Africa. Things like that are being discussed. So we have that as that aside as a legacy project. Then in view of that, what we are mandated to do as well is to ensure that for this to happen, there will be the need for us to build the capacity of African Union member states, so that member states get to appreciate the diaspora. They get a deeper understanding of what diasporas are cut out to do and what we can actually benefit when we join hands with the diaspora. So we have capacity building sessions that we do to actually make sure that these things are strengthened. And a typical example is what I am doing currently. We are working on the migration policy framework for Africa, and we are seeing which member states, we are doing an M&E, which is seeing to it that we are looking at member states who accede to certain protocols so far as diasporas are concerned. Do they have diaspora strategies? Do they have national policies protecting or guiding the diaspora discourse? What are some of the things, initiatives they are taking that could be highlighted? Are they doing certain outreaches that can reach out to the diaspora, and how sustainable are most of what they are doing? These are some of the things we look at, and then we measure these, then we advise these focal points appropriately. So this is basically what we do with CEDAW when it comes to capacity building of member states. Then on the other hand, CEDAW is mandated as well to establish, if there aren't any, establish diaspora networks. Where there are, help organize diaspora networks so as to be able to streamline their activities into the AU's programs and policies. So we do this as well, and this is how we go about it. For us to be able to actually reach out, we've divided the globe into 3. We have Europe, and then we have Americas and Caribbean. Then we have Middle East, Asia, and Oceania as the third desk. This way, through our regional consultative conferences, we are able to bring in diasporas or diaspora groups and then encourage them to form networks, bigger networks, because there's always power in networks. Because we need diasporas to have clout, and then we need them to have a voice. In order for them to do these, there'll be the need to, despite their independence or their willingness to be independent, it's as well good for them to join hands with others and then promote African Renaissance and Pan-Africanism per the African Union objectives, so that we'll be able to strengthen most of these bodies, because there are several, we noticed in our area of work that diasporas are doing wonderful things. They are doing so many wonderful initiatives, but because most of them work in silos, people do not know about them. Their initiatives are not able to actually be passed on to other generations, and so on and so forth. So basically what we usually preach lately is for the fact that the importance of diaspora groupings forming networks, because you will look at a typical example will be Europe, for example. We have the Africa-Europe Diaspora Platform based in Brussels. That's our umbrella organization that we interact with. However, ADEPT has about 45 registered diaspora networks under them, and each diaspora network has minimum of over 150 registered diaspora organizations under them. We have the biggest, which is Forum in France, and they have 1,000 and over registered African diaspora organizations under them. This way, they are able to actually forge ahead with a lot of civic activities. We encourage diasporas as well to join in civic activities, because that makes them appreciable in host countries as well as countries of residence in other matters, depending on the kind of diaspora that we are talking about. In relation to this and how best diasporas could tap into what Africa or the AU's development process, it is very important that diasporas are able to actually come together, and then based on where they live, we are able to actually engage the AU mission there. For example, in the United States, we can easily engage the AU mission in the United States, come together as one, and then see how best we could factor what they are doing into the policies and plans of the AU to forge ahead. And then when they have requests, it will be good as well for them to bring it through to CEDAW, and then CEDAW will be able to actually champion it as well. But let's bear in mind that this is a process, and it is not a one-day event. No matter how sometimes frustrating some of these things may be, the AU is willing, all right, to engage. Member states are willing, all right, at various levels to engage based on the kind of understanding and appreciation or the historical antecedents of the kind of diasporas that they have. So based on all these, we engage, and then we encourage as well diasporas to do circular migration because of skills. Whenever there is a skill in another country that there's a diaspora in another country that would make do with that or is suitable, we do those as well. So there are several other things we are doing so on the continental front, and as well as trying to make sure that we are bringing along most member states to have an in-depth understanding and appreciation of what diasporas are carved out to do. So I thank the first speaker for actually commending some of the initiatives taken by the AU to ensure that diasporas are recognized, especially during the International Day of the Decade, alongside other things, like, for example, a member state like Kenya, making sure that they lead the process with the AU and CARICOM to make sure that we are able to have the first Africa CARICOM Summit to promote South-South cooperation and then business as well. So without much ado, I think I would end here and say thank you so much once again for the privilege to speak.
Right, thank you so much, Ms. Angela Odai. You have really drawn our interest, to hear more about the Africa 6th region. And thank you for reminding us, the kind of work that CEDAW is doing. I was particularly interested to hear about the capacity building of member states, because I believe that, that's where more work needs to be done. And the fact that so many diaspora networks and that we need to work together, that's also a very important point that you have raised. And I hope, when it comes to interaction, we'll hear more, from others, who want to say something about that. But for now, we move on. And then I want to welcome Dr. Dinabantu Machala, who is going to speak to us about the solidarity in resistance and hope. He is going to, Reverend Dr. Dinabantu Machala is a Lutheran pastor and theologian from India. He is the area executive for Southern Asia in global ministries of the United Church of Christ and the Disciples Church in Cleveland, Ohio, USA. Prior to the current position, he was a program executive at the World Council of Churches in Geneva. He was my colleague, actually. We overlapped at some point. And he was responsible for the theological reflection for the decade to overcome violence in 2000 up to 2006. And also, he was responsible for the just and inclusive communities, from 2007 to 2014. Earlier, he was on the staff of the National Council of Churches in India and Gurugu Lutheran Theological College in Chennai, India. He holds a doctorate in theology from the South Asia Theological Research Institute in Bangalore, India. So I welcome you and encourage you to, I welcome you to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Piri, for that words of introduction. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, friends, wherever you are. At the outset, let me express my heartfelt thanks and appreciation to the organizers of this World Gathering on Africa and African Diaspora, with the focus today on the shared journey, and also for inviting me to make this presentation. I would also like to extend a special word of greetings and thanks to the moderators, Dr. Piri and Dr. Walker-Smith, my former colleagues and friends. It's such a joy and privilege to be back with friends and with these partners for justice. I'm also grateful to my previous speakers, Mr. Olaya and Mr. Angela Odai, for those inspiring and insightful presentations, particularly drawing from their experiences on the ground. I'm not an activist, but I'm a theologian, so my presentation would be more in that spirit. Though the focus today is on the shared experience with critical international organizations, what I want to do through this presentation is to help us become aware of the people and communities and their experiences of suffering and struggle against cultures and structures of domination and discrimination in different parts of the world. I believe it is necessary for us to here to journey together with all others who are likewise in search of another world that ensures life with dignity, justice, and freedom for all. In that, our struggle is a moral struggle and a struggle for a transformed world. Let me start reading a brief excerpts from the Booker Prize winner Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origins of a Discontent. In the winter of 1959, Martin Luther King and his wife Corita landed in India. He wanted to see the so-called untouchables, the lowest caste in the ancient Indian caste system, whom he had read about and had sympathy for. One afternoon, King and his wife journeyed to the southern tip of the country, to the city of Trivandrum in the state of Kerala and visited with high school students whose families had been untouchables. The principal made the introduction. Young people, he said, I would like to present to you a fellow untouchable from the United States of America. King was floored. He had not expected that term to be applied to him. He was, in fact, put off by it at first. He did not see the connection, did not see what the Indian caste system had to directly do with him, did not immediately see why the lowest caste people in India would view him as a low caste like themselves, see him as one of them. For a moment, Dr. King wrote, I was a bit shocked and peeved that I would be referred to as an untouchable. Then he began to think about the reality of the lives of the people he was fighting for, 20 million people consigned to the lowest rank in America for still smothering in an airtight cage of poverty, quarantined in isolated ghettos, exiled in their own country. He said to himself, yes, I am an untouchable, and every Negro in the USA is an untouchable. In that moment, he realized that the land of the free had imposed a caste system not unlike the caste system of India, and that he had lived under that system all of his life. It was what lay beneath the forces he was fighting in America. Friends, I'm here, therefore, as one in solidarity, bringing with me collective experiences of discrimination and marginalization, visions of a world that is in which everyone has the possibility to live with dignity and opportunities. I would like to focus on the experiences of over 260 million Dalits, the oppressed social outcasts in South Asia, who continue to suffer the consequences of the culturally legitimized and structurally embedded injustice and discrimination and disempowerment and impoverishment and exploitation. As victims of the obnoxious caste system, Dalits, who were hitherto called the untouchables and outcasts, despite constitutional provisions, are denied of civil and political rights, land, assets, productive employment, education, housing, water, and sanitation, and are exposed to ill health and malnutrition. Because of their stigmatized social identity as lowborn, they are despised, segregated, denied of access to spaces and opportunities, exposed to extreme poverty and degradement. Consequently, Dalits are the majority of those who are trafficked, majority of those who are in forced labor, incarcerated, least educated, exposed to malnutrition and hunger, homelessness and violence. Yet their labor and their bodies are constantly exploited. Dalit women are the worst sufferers on account of caste patriarchy. According to India's National Crime Records Bureau, or 2018 report, every day 117 Dalits were assaulted, 2 were murdered, 8 women raped in 2018. Sadly, the conviction rate stands barely at 28%. Yet, these have also been on a relentless struggle against these systems and structures that have dehumanized them for centuries. Alongside Dalits, there are also a large number of lower castes, and these too are exposed to many forms of dehumanization in varying degrees. And alongside this, as I would like to add, there are also the indigenous peoples. In fact, Asia is the home for largest number of indigenous people in the world. About 68% of the indigenous people live in Asia. Majority of them live in India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Philippines, who are also likewise discriminated, marginalized, and made to remain invisible because of their small and scattered presence. Let me expand the ambit a bit more to recognize communities who are likewise exposed to systemic discrimination, marginalization on account of their descent, that is birth and work in almost all the continents of the world. I want us to remember the indigenous peoples in many continents around the world, the Aboriginal communities in Australia, the Burakumin in Japan, the Quilombolas in Brazil, and the Roma and Romani people in Europe, Muhammadin in Yemen, and many such communities. In Africa too, similar communities exist in Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, and the Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Madagascar, Mali, Mauritania, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Somalia. In addition to these, there are millions of people who are exposed to different forms of discrimination, degrading treatment, and exploitation. I want us to particularly remember the stateless people, ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities, sexual minorities, and people with disabilities. I must underline that women in most of the above categories are the worst victims on account of patriarchy and the consequent. Like many in Africa and in diaspora communities, these communities around the world are also engaged in struggles for dignity, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, freedom, sovereignty, and self-determination. The 10 thematic outlines, the 10 thematic areas as outlined in the concept paper resonate with the experiences of these people. Despite all this, we must also acknowledge the increasing occurrence of people's resistance, both big and small, in many parts of the world, responding to the challenges of systemic injustice and violation of lives and rights, against discrimination and marginalization. As someone said, there seems to be a contagion of resistance against discrimination, injustice, and abuse worldwide. These indicate that people are coming together in solidarity and to fight against injustice and abusive powers and for human rights and dignity. Therefore, my friends, even as we stay focused on Africa and African diaspora at this conference, let us also remember that the global nature of the problem, as well as the global solidarity it could build, and the global impact that it could make. Such intentional stepping out and embrace is necessary so that the transformative capacities of our struggles extend far beyond and inspiring synergies for the transformation of the world. And this is one of the things that the World Council of Churches, to which Dr. Piri and I belonged, I used to work there. So this is one of the things that we have been constantly sort of highlighting as a possible way that we build alternatives to the current versions and visions of the world. That is a version of a world built on the margins, perspectives of those on the margins of the world. In this spirit, I would like to lift up 3 moral challenges which we need to address for a common future that ensures dignity and life for all. First is that our struggle is against certain cultures of domination and discrimination in many forms and the way they legitimize injustice. These thrive on dubious theories of self-elevation by devaluing some, disempower some in order to feel powerful and privileged, project looting as valor and cleverness, and institutionalize injustice for a skewed sense of progress and growth. These stink of immorality, and we need to unmask, confront, and dismantle their edifices together in solidarity. Secondly, there seems to be a resurgence of these cultures in many parts of the world, particularly as the current trends of right-wing politics, fascism, populism, and nationalism that have become pervasive in many parts of the world. Certain inglorious cultures and practices, such as racism, caste and patriarchy in my country, India, and similar hierarchies are being refurbished, packaged as symbols of culture. And thirdly, in a situation such as this, I hope that the present emphasis on Pan-African experience and connections would help us recognize and acknowledge similar experiences of domination and discrimination in other parts and communities of the world, and facilitate developing common visions and solidarity to dismantle structures, systems, and cultures that break and crush lives, people, and communities. Our struggle is not only to seek justice for ourselves, but also for the transformation of the world. I started this presentation with an event from Dr. Martin Luther King's life, who also gave us a dream of a just and equal world and gave us the call to transform the jangling discords into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood and sisterhood. Let me end this with a quote by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, one of India's most venerated social reformers, who shook the foundations of caste system as never before, and who continues to inspire millions to struggle for social justice in India and South Asia. He said, "A just society is that society in which ascending sense of reverence and descending sense of contempt is dissolved into the creation of a just and compassionate society." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dinabantu Manchala. You have not disappointed us with your presentation. In fact, you are widening our understanding of what it means to be on the margins of the society and the importance of all those people who are in the margins to work together in solidarity to overcome, the experiences that they have. I'm particularly drawn to towards the end, the conclusion. You are saying that we need to seek justice for ourselves, but also seek to transform the world. That it's not just enough to look for justice for us, but we want the transformation of the whole world so that every human being, is recognized and lives their lives to the fullness. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. We now want to open, the conversation, and I encourage, people to ask questions. First, I don't see any questions that have come in the chat, not in the chat, but in the questions and answers. I don't see any questions there. But whilst we are waiting to get answers there or questions there, I want to encourage, the speakers, to ask each other questions, because you have listened, to what was said about CEDAW. You've listened, to what was said about, the first presentation, and also from Dinabantu. What did you hear that, striked you and that drew your attention? Do we still have Mr. Ade Alaya?
Hello, sorry, I just stepped out of the room for a minute. Could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, what did you hear from the other presentations that draw your attention?
All right. Well, I was, well, two. I first to begin with, the lady who spoke about the diaspora.
Yes.
I've done well. Even before I started my research, I did do some work with then AFFORD, it was called, African Foundation for Development. And they went on to become larger and became Africa-Europe Development Platform. And then just before, I think at first, they were instrumental, because by that stage I joined them in my research. They were instrumental in actually, because there are a number of civil society stakeholders engaged in formulating the SDGs. I don't know if people knew that. So AFFORD, or I think it was AFFORD when they started that process, Gibril Fall, Professor Fall, I know he was part of that process. And I think in particular, there's one SDG that looks around remittances, because I'd even done some work with them around that. And they were very key in having that particular SDG included. And that is key to all of us here, both in the diaspora and at home, because I remember one of the things that we found in my research with AFFORD, and they were talking about, oh my God, that was, I think, 2007 that I was doing that research with them. We found that the more remittances were being made than actual aid or anything. That was just from that long ago that we were finding that, all this thing, oh, we're getting aid and oh, blah, blah, blah. No, people, the amount of money that was going in remittances or more. So hearing the person about the diaspora, she brought back, my memories of AFFORD and Africa-Europe Development Platform. And then also, certainly, because I've not been doing a lot with them in recent years, I've been doing more around European Network Against Racism, and more collaborative work with them. So it was actually quite interesting to learn that they have grown exponentially since I knew they were moving to Brussels, and I think I even got an email from them this week or last week. But yeah. So that was quite interesting. The second speaker, the gentleman, Dr. Manchala, that was actually, I was thinking about putting something in chat around that actually, because one, I mean, what a lot of us don't know, we don't talk about a lot, is the diaspora that is actually, or the people of African descent that are actually in India, in the Middle East, and various, even I didn't know, Central Europe, as far as I think even Russia, and certainly, in other former colonies around the globe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is, we do need to, because as I'm sure, well, certainly COVID, sort of thing that COVID kind of highlighted at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think there are people of African descent there as well, because slave trade went all, enslavement, trading enslaved Africans went all over the place. So I think I think we do need to have better knowledge exchange with those communities as well. And they are there. I've actually seen it online. Yes. You do see, someone who is, you can see someone of African descent from their features and everything, but they were in a sari and they probably are Hindu. And there are communities of these people who are probably experiencing a lot of, so we need to be, that's something that the permanent forum probably need to look at as well when it's set up.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much. That also just reminded me, because I come from Malawi, and that's on the eastern side of the African continent. We don't hear much about, where did the slaves who were taken from there taken to? And I took it upon myself, to find out, because it's also part of my story, right? The story of my people who were taken from the eastern coast. Where did they go? So we hear that, they actually went to India, they went to Middle East, and then some were taken to Europe, and some were taken to North America, to North Africa. So we don't hear about them, but there's also this whole history, that we need to take with us as part of this diaspora.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly on that, because I think most of us are on a learning curve. I was aware that we'd moved there, but I just got into my head that one, they put, well, you hear that the males were castrated, and, the women. And so, you just get into that true natural attrition. They've probably assimilated and you couldn't tell the difference, maybe just through colorism or something. But then when like I said, if they're there on the net, if you do look on the net, you will find there are actually communities of people who are, they are indubitably African.
Yeah.
And they're not saying they're not, but they've been in India, or they've been in Saudi Arabia, or as you rightly said, some of the North African countries. Yes, Saudi Arabia, there are very large communities. I was surprised. There are large communities of people of African descent living there, and have been living there for years, apparently. And they're not necessarily living in salubrious circumstances either. So, I mean, one has got to be very cognizant of the diaspora when we're talking about.
Though we should not move away from the issue that was raised, by Dr. Dina Bantu, that
definitely,
that there are communities that have suffered, just as much as the Africans
who are not.
And we need to embrace, those communities as well. Right?
Yeah, I understand that, but my remit is generally around people of African descent.
Yes.
So as I said, charity begins at home. Sorry, but I agree.
In the chat, there's a question about what about Latin America? We've heard about this, the diaspora as the sixth African nation. And I think this one is directed at Miss Angela Odai, wanting to know what about the networks in Latin America that you are working with. Do we still have Miss Angela?
I'm happy to say something quickly until she comes.
Okay.
Because with the COVID-19, as you said, actually, I was part of the international coalition, and it is international. So there were people from certainly Brazil, and Mexico, and various other Latin American countries. One of the things that happened with COVID, and that is in your face now, really, is that things really got very bad for people of African descent. And the more recent arrivals, such as like the Haitians, they got the worst of it, even in Latin America. Which is why a lot of them were moving to the USA, because they were actually being really stigmatized and discriminated. I was actually in one UN meeting. I'm saying this, I probably shouldn't say this, but I was surprised. I was in one UN event, and I was the tone, nothing directly was said, but just the tone to me was not really, was lacking, put it that way. And this was around the issue of people of African descent, specifically mainly the Haitians, but it is people of African descent in countries like Venezuela, Colombia, And so even in Brazil, we've had Brazilians, I've been in rooms with Brazilians and, you know, were under lockdown. They some Afro-Brazilians and people of some people from the diaspora living in Brazil were experiencing very gross, it was very difficult, very, very difficult for them. So I think things are improving a bit, but maybe hopefully your other speaker is back now, so she might be able to tell you more.
Right. I understand she's not available at the moment, but I want to ask, Dr. Dinabantu Manchala, do you have questions to the first speaker, Mr. Ade Olaiya?
Thank you.
Or comments, yes, because you already commented as you were speaking, but maybe there are some questions that you may have even for the second speaker, which maybe the first speaker can respond to.
No, actually, Dr. Piri, thank you for asking me. I do not have questions, but I just want to sort of underline a couple of things, because as an outsider, but one in solidarity, what these two presentations have done to me are the following. One, Dr. Olaiya has certainly sort of inspired me by saying it is important for us to tell our story loud and clear, to a long legacy of our engagement and our struggle, because many people in many parts of the world are not aware of it or have a tendency to look at an African problem. Every time, the people on the margins are people who are victimized or who are, unjustly treated. They raise their voices. The world tends to look at them as if, it's their problem. They don't sort of own it as everybody's problem. But I think Dr. Olaiya has certainly made me emphasize the need to sort of talk about it and sort of bring it to the international fora and let the world know the injustice and oppression or the abuse of power that the people are experiencing. And the second picked up from the Ms. Olaiya's presentation, Angela's presentation, is that the importance of networking. Networking, at different levels in different parts of the world. And I think that is very important. It's not just enough to be talking about it, but it's also important to be strategizing in order that we sort of move further. And the third thing that I would like to certainly want to add in the light of these two is to sort of, the African and African diaspora communities have been in this struggle against, these global forces of oppression, discrimination, and colonization, and many other. And you need to sort of extend this positive energy to the other parts of the world, especially the marginalized communities, the small scattered communities around the world that I have listed, so that they feel empowered and encouraged and inspired by your story. And in that, it becomes our story and our struggle for a transformed world. Sorry for using theological language, but that is what I am. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much.
Can I say something quickly? Can I say something quickly there in response to Dr. Manchala? Because I know I do tend to be, very kind of closeted in that, but in a sense, I think one of the things that I also was getting from his speech when he was speaking earlier is, and we often hear about, as they say, enslaved people taken, but what you don't hear is the stories, and Dr. Manchala probably knows it, or he may not, about those people who, even historically, who went there and became rulers. So, for example, you have this term Sidi, which is used in India, and it's used derogatively now, but the original Lord Sidi was someone who was taken as a slave from Ethiopia, but he ended up being a ruler in a part of India for some time. And So you know, we have to recognize that also happened, that there was, you know, just as much as you recognize the negative, you've got to realize that there was some assimilation, because, you know, if he was taken as a slave, as an enslaved person,
Yes.
and yet he rose through the ranks militarily to become a ruler of a part of India, which is historically is there proven. It means that, and he intermarried even with them. So it means that there must be, even that during those days, there was some recognition going on. So we have to recognize that as well. And we've got to recognize, I agree with the doctor, I'm not a doctor, I agree with the doctor, that, yeah, we have to recognize other struggles. I'm just saying that for me personally, I've only got so much energy, and I tend to give most of my energy to our cause, because we really are, just like, yeah, I understand, I agree, the Indian caste system is vicious. And thanks for highlighting that we have that amongst ourselves as well. So thank you.
Right. Thank you. So there are two questions, and I think both of them are directed to Dina Bantu. The first one is, what instruments are currently available in the Matirato to booster and deepen this transformation of the world into an equitable, just, and compassionate one? I don't know whether it's to you or to the other two. Do you recognize that question, or is it something that you can answer? Dr. Dina Bantu.
Well, I really don't have much to say on that, Dr. Piri, except to sort of reiterate the point that I have already made, that it is certainly necessary for us to build solidarity.
Yes.
Because, you know, our world and our communities and our societies are governed by networks of evil. That I think it's necessary for us to build networks for the good of the people.
Yes.
Networks for justice, partnerships for justice, so that, you know, we become, you know, we are able to multiply these positive energies to transform the world. So as a theologian and as one from India, I would strongly believe in that. The second thing is, you know, there is no end to these struggles, and, you know, we need to be constantly on this struggle forever, and I think constantly expose the struggles, and so that's what it is. So therefore, we need to encourage one another with these bonds of solidarity and support.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I answer on that question then?
Yes.
Because yes, as I may not be a doctor, but I have got an MA in human rights. So certainly there are legal instruments which are available, and sadly, a lot of the state parties to those instruments continue to have those human rights violations, which is why there's this international furore, because, for example, besides Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you have got the International Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination.
Okay.
So that is an international norm which all state parties who are signature and who have ratified it, including countries like the USA and the UK, and many European countries and Latin American countries, where there's police violence, which targets people of African descent. You know, they've signed the International Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and that's what led to the DDPA, the Durban Declaration, because that sort of thing, the kind of racism that was being noticed, historical and contemporary forms of racism. You've got other instruments such as the International Convention or Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. I kind of alluded to that. You've got the International Covenant or Convention for Civil and Political Rights as well. So under those especially, the conventions, the civil, political, economic, cultural, and social rights, there should be equality. That's the Vienna Declaration, which which became, it means that we should all have equality in terms of how those rights, in access to those rights. And state parties know that, but they don't necessarily practice that. They don't necessarily implement those rights. And sometimes even where, for example, say the AU has got regional conventions and so on, it may exclude, or it may, some minorities, or it may not be, it may be less fair to some minorities. I have to say this, to some minorities. And so that is the sort of thing that I kind of alluded to in my bump. Yeah. So there are, just to round off in terms of the question, yes, there are legal instruments, there are international norms which state parties are meant to
Right. Thank you so much. Right. There's one more question.
Yes, I will do. Can I do that, Dr. Piri?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, before I do that, let me just add one more sentence to what I was saying in the previously, for the question about transformation of the world. And I believe I wanted to say that the transformation of the society must begin not as per the plans and schemes of the powerful and privileged, but the visions and aspirations of those who are yearning for life, those who are unjustly treated. So to that extent, our role, or the role of civil society organization, is to sort of bring these visions and aspirations of people together and evolve, not only just evolve alternative visions of the world. The thing with many of us who are in struggle is that we are constantly resisting and sort of struggling for our rights. But I think it's also necessary that we work towards providing alternatives to the oppressive and unjust expressions or the realities of the world that we find ourselves in today. So having said that, let me just sort of move to the question about Indians' caste system. And I think if I begin to talk about it, I can sort of take another 1 hour to do that. But say that, caste system is peculiar to India. It originated in India and extended to South Asia, and it is extended all over the world, wherever the Indians are present. That's how it is. The thing is, caste is as I said, is a peculiar system which is based on a graded hierarchy, and people are placed in this hierarchy as per their birth. So it is not something that you can change, and you are born into a caste. And so therefore, the Brahmin or the other high caste claim that they are born that way, and then they say that the Dalits are born inferior. So it is all based on a Brahminical Hindu cosmology, which holds that the Brahmins came out of the head of the primordial man, and those on the lower came from the legs and feet of this primordial man, and the Dalits are completely outside this caste hierarchy and all of that. So Dalits are not people from outside, but they're actually native people. In one theories of caste system says that it was actually the Dalits became Dalits because they resisted the invading Aryans who came with a system called caste. I began to sort of oppress and dominate and take over the Indian society. So in other words, the Dalits are paying the price for their resistance, and they continue to remain on the margins of the society. But I'll tell you more about it, but I think we don't have time to do that. Thank you very much.
No, that's a very good point, because it takes us back to what was discussed, I think yesterday or the day before, where we raised the issue of Haiti. That, Haiti is a very good example of a people that resisted the colonialism. And since then, they've been paying for that. So you see the same, happening all over the world, that when people unite to resist, eventually you also pay for it. But that does not stop us from resisting, that we need to continue to resist. And from this discussion today, what I liked was the importance of resistance that comes from the bottom, that comes from the people, the communities themselves, to resist whatever is up and that is oppressing them, whether it comes from within their country or from outside. That's important. And another important issue that I've also picked up, from our conversation today is the importance of these networks, okay, that we need to belong to some kind of a network. And then all the networks need to come together and speak with one voice, knowing that there's power in numbers. Okay, any other comments or questions? I'm also looking at the question and answer. There's no any other question coming from there. And from the chat, I also don't see any more questions. Right, so in the absence of the questions, then maybe we need to transit to the next sessions. Okay.
Dr. Fury,
Yes.
there is a question from Dr. Gunda, and there is another question from an anonymous attendee in the Q&A. I don't know if you can see that.
We've already done that question.
You feel that's complete? Okay.
Yes, we've done the first one and the second one. And from the chat, the question that I saw was about it was about Latin America. Yeah, and that too has been answered.
Yeah, the Latin American situation is quite well. I find it quite well. As I said, I am being of mixed heritage, both sides of the pond, I call them.
Yeah.
And I do find it very worrying as well that in Latin America, they're still experiencing such very similar as what happens in the castes, Indian castes.
Yeah. Really sad indeed. Yeah. So we now move to the practice sessions for the breakaway sessions, where we will have an explanation. Angelique, is this something that you are doing or I'm doing?
Yes, we are prepared to go to the breakaways if that's what we would like, but for people to take a quick 5-minute break.
Okay.
And then we come back, but don't turn the computers off. Don't turn the computers off, but take a 5-minute break. And then when you come back, we can provide the links for the breakaways, if that's
okay. Good. Thank you so much. Right. So we now take a break, 5 minutes. And that means, let's aim to come back at the 15, I would say it's 15:40 instead of 15:39, but 15:40.
Yes, that would be great. 6 minutes. 6 minutes, please. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will get there. are going. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will get there. Boom, boom, ti-boom, ti-boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, ti-boom, ti-boom, boom, boom. We will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will get there. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know